Every 63 minutes, another warplane rolled off the line. At first glance, it sounds like a legend, a propaganda myth from the age of black and white newsreels. But in 1944, it was real. On the flat farmlands of Michigan stood a factory so massive, so relentless, that it turned raw steel into bombers faster than anyone believed possible. This was Ford's Willow Run, the factory that helped turn the tide of the Second World War. Before the war, America wasn't ready for a global fight. In 1939, the U.S. Army Air Corps had barely a few hundred modern aircraft. Factories were still building cars, refrigerators, and tractors. Europe was already burning, and across the Atlantic, Nazi Germany's Luftwaffe dominated the skies. If the United States was going to stand a chance, it needed an air fleet larger than anything the world had ever seen. But that kind of production required something the military didn't have: industry on a scale only Detroit could imagine. Henry Ford believed he had the answer. The man who revolutionized car manufacturing with the Model T now wanted to mass-produce heavy bombers, the four-engine B-24 Liberator. It was a radical idea. A car factory building aircraft. Generals, engineers, even Ford's own advisors thought he'd lost his mind. One Air Force officer reportedly told him, "You can't build a bomber like a Model T." Ford's reply was simple: "Watch me." The B-24 was not an easy machine to produce. It had over 1 million individual parts and required the precision of watchmaking on an industrial scale. Yet Ford's engineers believed they could bring the logic of the assembly line to the skies. They began sketching plans for a facility unlike anything on Earth. One so vast that workers could build an entire airplane under a single roof. By 1941, construction began in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Designed by Albert Kahn, the architect of Detroit, the Willow Run plant stretched nearly a mile long and covered more than 3.5 million square feet. The roof itself curved in a distinctive L shape. To fit around a county line Ford refused to cross because it would have meant paying local taxes. It was Fordian stubbornness mixed with American ambition, and it would soon become the beating heart of the nation's war machine. When the first parts rolled in, it didn't look like a miracle. It looked like chaos. Car builders struggled with aircraft tolerances. Mechanics had to learn aviation engineering overnight. Early planes failed inspection after inspection, but behind the noise and confusion, something extraordinary was forming. Each week, the production line grew smoother, faster, more disciplined. The workers, many of them women who had never set foot in a factory before, began to master their craft. They called it learning by doing, and they did it under the pressure of a world at war. In less than 2 years, the impossible began to happen. As German bombs fell on London and American troops fought their way across the Pacific, a new kind of front line emerged, one made of steel, sweat, and assembly lines. The experiment that everyone said would fail was about to become one of the greatest industrial achievements in history. At Willow Run, the clock was ticking, and every 63 minutes, America would strike back. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. In a single morning, isolationism died. The United States, still staggering from the Great Depression, was now at war with two empires. The factories of America would become its new front line, and the race to armed democracy began. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's voice crackled over the radio months earlier with a warning and a promise. We must be the great arsenal of democracy. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a battle plan. Washington ordered industry to turn its peacetime production into war machines. Car plants would make tanks. Typewriter companies would make machine guns. Sewing machine factories would build parachutes. And Ford Motor Company would build bombers. What happened next was an industrial metamorphosis unlike anything the world had seen. In Michigan, Ohio, and California, construction crews worked day and night to build new factories, temples of steel and concrete devoted to mass production. At Willow Run, farmland disappeared under a mile-long assembly line. Its workers came from every corner of the country. Farmers from Iowa, auto mechanics from Detroit, young women leaving home for the first time. At its peak, over 40,000 men and women swarmed through its hangars in 3 overlapping shifts, the lights never dimming, the machines never silent. Inside, the atmosphere was electric and exhausting. The air smelled of oil and aluminum dust. The roar of riveting guns never stopped. Every day, thousands of hands hammered, welded, wired, and tested. The average shift lasted 10 to 12 hours. The temperature inside could climb past 100 degrees. And still, they kept going. For many, this was more than a job. It was a mission. Newspapers began calling Detroit the arsenal of democracy. But for the people inside these factories, it didn't feel like a title. It felt like war. Posters reminded workers, "Your job is your battlefront." The enemy wasn't across the ocean. It was on the clock. Every delay meant fewer planes in the sky, fewer bombers over Europe, fewer chances for the soldiers already fighting and dying overseas. Among them were the Rosies, the women who stepped into the roles men left behind. Housewives, teachers, farmhands, all trained to rivet, weld, and assemble. Many had never earned their own paycheck before. Now they were building bombers. One of them, Rose Will Monroe, worked at Willow Run, later becoming the face of the Rosie the Riveter campaign that defined an era. For millions of American women, it wasn't just war work, it was liberation. But Willow Run was also a crucible of contradictions. African American workers were hired, but often segregated, limited to the toughest or lowest paying jobs. The WWII campaign, Victory Abroad, and Victory Against Discrimination at Home, echoed through the factory halls. They, too, knew that their labor was a weapon. In the fight against fascism, equality was part of the battle. By mid-1943, Willow Run was still fighting its own war, not against the Axis, but against inefficiency. Production lines stalled, designs changed weekly, and logistics were chaotic. It seemed the critics were right. Maybe you couldn't build a bomber like a Model T. But then, quietly, something shifted. Ford engineers, led by Charles Sorensen, the same man who had perfected the car assembly line, began rethinking everything. Instead of moving parts to planes, they moved the planes themselves. The production line flowed, machines synchronized, processes standardized, and for the first time, the impossible began to look inevitable. America's factories were awakening. Across the nation, smokestacks rose like sentinels, and the night sky glowed orange with the fire of production. The United States was becoming the world's industrial giant, not through fear or tyranny, but through determination and unity. And in the heart of Michigan, the great experiment of Willow Run was about to reach its breaking point, the moment when speed and scale would fuse into something the world had never seen before. The countdown to 63 minutes had begun. By early 1944, the sound inside Willow Run was deafening. A mechanical symphony of hammers, drills, and roaring engines. From the outside, it looked like a city made of steel. From the inside, it was a living organism, Thousands of moving parts, thousands of human hands, and one single goal: build a bomber faster than the enemy could destroy one. Charles Sorensen, Ford's legendary production chief, had done the impossible. He took the chaos of early failures and turned it into order, precision, and rhythm. Cast Iron Charlie, as they called him, mapped every step of the assembly process down to the minute. The B-24 Liberator, once considered too complex for mass production, now flowed through the plant like an automobile. It started as scattered components: aluminum ribs, cables, engines, turrets, scattered across the floor like a metallic puzzle. As each hour passed, these fragments moved forward along an assembly line nearly a mile long. Workers riveted fuselage panels, electricians wired the instrument panels, and mechanics installed engines and landing gear. By the time it reached the end of the line, it wasn't a pile of parts anymore. It was a fully armed 4-engine bomber, capable of flying 1,500 miles and carrying 8,000 pounds of bombs. And every 63 minutes, one rolled out of the hangar door. The transformation was staggering. In less than 3 years, Willow Run went from producing nothing to building bombers faster than any other factory in history. The first planes took 10,000 man-hours each. By mid-1944, they were producing one B-24 every hour. The press called it the 63-minute miracle. The military called it a logistical revolution. At its peak, Willow Run produced 8 bombers per shift, 650 per month, and more than 8,600 in total before the war's end. No other factory in the world, Allied or Axis, matched its speed or scale. This wasn't automation. It was human endurance. Workers didn't have robots, computers, or safety regulations. They had muscle, discipline, and belief. Some slept in their cars outside the factory to avoid missing shifts. Many never saw daylight, entering before sunrise and leaving long after dark. They didn't wear uniforms, but they were soldiers all the same. The entire operation pulsed with a sense of urgency that bordered on obsession. The workers knew that each bomber they finished meant another squadron over Europe, another mission that might save lives on the ground. In the break rooms, photographs of sons and brothers serving overseas hung beside production charts. When engines roared during test runs, some workers would pause and whisper, "That one's for them." While America perfected the art of mass production, Nazi Germany was trapped by its own arrogance. Hitler's engineers built masterpieces, the Me-262 jet, the V-2 rocket, but they built them in small numbers, with craftsmanship instead of consistency. The Luftwaffe couldn't keep up. For every German plane destroyed, Willow Run and factories like it built 5 more. The balance of the air war shifted, not in the skies, but on the factory floor. By late 1944, the Allied bombers ruled the air. Entire fleets of B-24s filled the horizon. A thunderous swarm of American industry turned into flight. Each one traced its lineage back to a single factory in Michigan, and to the people who made time itself their enemy. The 63-minute miracle wasn't just about speed. It was proof of something far greater, that when a free nation mobilizes its creativity, discipline, and faith, it can outbuild any tyranny on Earth. Every time a new bomber lifted off from Willow Run's airfield, the ground trembled. But to the workers watching from the hangar doors, it wasn't the sound of engines. It was the sound of victory being built. One plane, every 63 minutes. Behind every gleaming bomber that rolled out of Willow Run was a story of exhaustion, sacrifice, and pride. To the outside world, it was an industrial miracle. Inside, it was a war zone of its own kind, a battlefield of fatigue, sweat, and relentless pressure. The people who powered Willow Run weren't soldiers. They were welders, riveters, machinists, and inspectors, but they carried the same sense of duty as anyone in uniform. Each worker knew that what they built today could decide who lived or died tomorrow. The mantra spread across the factory floor. The quicker we build them, the quicker they come home. Women made up nearly a third of the workforce. Some had never even used a wrench before the war. Now they were climbing inside fuselages, drilling rivets above their heads, and sealing wings with precision that stunned military inspectors. The name Rosie the Riveter became legend. But the real Rosies were flesh and blood, blistered and exhausted, holding this operation together day after day. They faced skepticism, long hours, and low pay. Yet they outperformed many of the men they replaced. Their hands didn't just build airplanes, they redefined what women were capable of in America. For black workers, the fight was harder still. Many were restricted to janitorial or unskilled roles at first. Others faced open hostility from white co-workers or local unions. But they persisted, driven by the belief that helping defeat fascism abroad might finally earn equality at home. At Willow Run, the seeds of civil rights were planted in the shadow of bomber wings. They called it the Double V, victory against Hitler and victory against hate. Conditions were brutal. The plant ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The heat from the welding torches and engines often pushed temperatures past 100 degrees. Aluminum dust clung to every surface. The constant thunder of riveting guns made conversation impossible. Workers learned to read lips, to communicate with hand signals. The noise, the fatigue, the repetition, it wore people down. Yet absentee rates stayed low. Everyone knew the stakes. The newsreels from the front lines, Normandy, Italy, the Pacific, reminded them what they were working for. Every plane was inspected before it flew. When one failed a test, the team that built it often stayed overtime, unpaid, to fix the flaw before the next shift began. Pride was stronger than any paycheck. Supervisors recalled seeing women cry when a bomber finally passed inspection, not because they were tired, but because they knew that plane would soon be flying over Europe. When the first fully assembled B-24 rolled out and took to the skies, workers stopped what they were doing and ran outside. For a moment, the factory fell silent. They watched as it climbed into the gray Michigan sky, engines roaring, sunlight glinting off its wings. To most of them, that was the closest they would ever come to the war they were fighting. The numbers were staggering. Over 8,000 bombers built, tens of thousands of workers trained, entire communities transformed. But behind every statistic was a face, a mother, a student, a farmer, a mechanic, who believed that their hands could help win a global war. Willow Run wasn't just a factory. It was a weapon forged from unity. Ordinary Americans standing shoulder to shoulder, proving that democracy could outwork dictatorship. Their war wasn't fought with rifles or tanks, but with rivets, blueprints, and courage. And as the months went on, those hands, worn, burned, and trembling, would go on building the machines that would end history's deadliest conflict. By mid-1944, the roar of American bombers echoed across every front. The sky above Europe was filled with the thunder of B-17 and B-24s, thousands of them, flying in formations so vast they blotted out the sun. It was the sound of an empire being undone by production. And deep inside Michigan, Willow Run kept feeding that storm, one aircraft at a time. Every 63 minutes, the factory doors opened and another bomber emerged, freshly painted, engines rumbling, ready for war. Each one carried a handwritten mark somewhere inside the fuselage, initials, a hometown, sometimes a prayer. It wasn't official policy, but it became a quiet tradition. For the workers, these weren't just machines. They were messages to the men flying them. We built this for you. Come back home. The scale of what America achieved was staggering. By 1944, U.S. factories were producing 96,000 aircraft a year, more than Germany and Japan combined. While the Axis powers built in desperation, America built in confidence. The German factories hid underground to escape bombing raids. Japanese plants ran out of materials and fuel. But across the United States, the smokestacks burned brighter than ever. Each new plane was proof that democracy could mobilize faster, adapt quicker, and endure longer than tyranny. Willow Run became the beating heart of that belief. Its planes crossed the Atlantic by the hundreds, joining massive raids over Nazi strongholds. In the summer of 1944, B-24 Liberators built on that factory floor were bombing synthetic oil plants in Germany, crippling the fuel supply that kept Hitler's war machine alive. Others dropped supplies over Italy, cleared the skies before D-Day, or hunted U-boats over the Atlantic. Each flight carried the effort of thousands who never left home, yet changed the course of the war. The Allied advance wasn't just a triumph of soldiers, it was a triumph of logistics. Every tank that rolled across Europe, every ship that sailed into the Pacific, every bomber that darkened the sky had a story rooted in the factories, the railways, and the workers who refused to stop. Production became a weapon of its own, one that Hitler couldn't bomb, intimidate, or outbuild. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was collapsing. Its aces were gone, its planes grounded by fuel shortages, its factories shattered by the same bombers that had been born in Willow Run. The war that once seemed endless now had a horizon, and that horizon was lined with American-made aircraft. When victory finally came in 1945, the news reached the factory floor like a shockwave. Sirens wailed, machines stopped, and workers dropped their tools. Some cheered, some wept. Others simply stood still, staring at the giant hangar doors as if waiting for one more bomber to roll out. For nearly 4 years, their lives had been measured in minutes, 63 per plane, 24 hours a day. And now, suddenly, the mission was over. The war ended not just with soldiers returning home, but with the quiet knowledge that it was the worker, not the general, who had given democracy its wings. From the skies over Berlin to the factories of Detroit, the message was clear. The free world had not only fought back, it had outbuilt its enemies. The arsenal of democracy had triumphed.